Montana Territory, October 1874. The wind had a bite to it that morning, the kind that cut through wool and set the horses restless in their stalls. Kade Prescott had just crossed the fence line of the Weller Ranch when he saw the barn door swinging loose in the wind, and something about it did not sit right. He had not planned on stopping. He was headed further north, chasing down strays that had broken from a cattle drive 3 days back. But something instinct maybe, or just the way the air went still made him dismount and push that door open. It was quiet inside, save for the horses shifting and the occasional creak of the rafters. Dust floated in the thin shafts of morning light. Kade's boots echoed on the wooden slats as he walked deeper in, something pulling him toward the hayloft. He climbed up slow, hand brushing the old rope bailing line as he went. And then he stopped short. She was curled up on a bed of hay, tucked between 2 bales, a worn blanket half draped over her. She looked barely conscious, face pale, lips cracked, sweat clinging to her brow. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, dirt smudging the hem. She was not bleeding, but she was burning up. Her skin was hot to the touch. "Ma'am," Kade's voice was low, gentle. He knelt beside her, pushing a few damp strands of hair from her face. "Can you hear me?" She stirred, eyes fluttering open, clouded and unfocused. "Please, I do not want to go back," she whispered. "You are safe," Kade said, already slipping his arms beneath her. "I got you." She was light, too light and limp as a rag doll. Her head fell against his shoulder as he lifted her. Kade did not waste time. He carried her down the ladder carefully but steady, heart thudding hard in his chest. He could feel how wrong she felt, how her bones pressed too sharp beneath her skin, how her breathing rattled soft against his chest. He got her up on the saddle in front of him, holding her close as he rode hard for the nearby cabin he used when he was driving cattle through this area. It was not much, one room, a stove, a cot, but it was warm, and it was his. By the time he laid her down on the cot and got the fire going, her fever had climbed higher. He soaked a rag in cool water from the well and pressed it to her forehead. She moaned and turned her face toward his hand, like it was the only thing tethering her to the world. It took 2 full days before she spoke again. Kade had stayed by her side the whole time, feeding her spoonfuls of broth, keeping her cool with wet cloths, whispering quiet words even when she could not hear them. He had not left her. Not once. On the 3rd morning, her eyes opened fully, clearer this time. She looked around the room, then at him. "Where am I?" "You are safe," Kade said simply. "You were sick. I found you in the hayloft at Weller's place. I brought you here." She blinked slowly. "You carried me." "That is right." Her eyes welled up just for a moment before she blinked the tears away fast. "I am sorry. I should not have been there. I just needed somewhere to rest." "I am not asking questions," Kade said. "Not until you have your strength back." She sat up slightly, wincing as she pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. "My name is Genevie Ward, Kade Prescott," she nodded, then looked down at her hands. "I have not eaten in days." He stood from the chair beside the bed and went to the stove, ladling some warm stew into a bowl. He handed it to her with a spoon, watching as she ate slow but hungry. "You from around here?" he asked once she had the strength to sit back and talk. "Used to be," she said. "My family had a place near Big Timber, but they passed. After that, I took work where I could, some of it honest, some of it not so much." He saw the shame in her eyes, but he did not push. It was not pity he felt, just a heavy pull in his chest. Like he had found something he had not known he was missing. She stayed in his cabin for days. He brought her books from town, made her tea with dried mint leaves, left a carved wood flower on the windowsill one morning. She smiled when she saw it, the first real smile he got from her. "I should leave soon," she said one night as they shared coffee by the fire. "I do not want to be a burden. You are not. I do not have anywhere to go." "Then stay." Genevie looked up at him, her eyes searching. "Why are you doing all this?" Kade leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because I saw you lying there in that hayloft, burning up and alone, and something in me said I could not walk away, and I still cannot." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. "Not yet. That night, after she had fallen asleep, Kade sat beside the cot and watched her breathe. He did not know what she had been through. He did not know how long it would take for her to trust him. But he knew this: he had carried her out of that barn, and he never meant to put her down again. The first snow came early that year, thick and quiet, settling on the cabin roof like a blanket pulled up over the world. Kade woke to the smell of coffee not his doing and the sound of a pan shifting on the stove. He sat up slow, the ache in his shoulder from years of breaking wild horses flaring with the cold. Genevie stood with her back to him, hair loose down her spine. Sleeves rolled past her elbows as she scraped eggs into a tin plate. Her posture was steadier now, the hollows in her cheeks softened. She moved like someone remembering how. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said over her shoulder. "You didn't." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You sleep any?" "A little." She turned, holding out the plate. "I figured I owed you a warm meal." He took it without a word, nodding his thanks. They ate by the fire, the quiet between them easy now, like the hush of snow falling outside. After a while, Genevie set her plate down and leaned back against the wall. "I used to cook for a boarding house in Bozeman, not for long. The owner's wife didn't like me much. You cook better than she did." She liked her rules better than she liked people. Kade gave a low chuckle, not loud, just enough to warm the air between them. "You planning on heading back to town?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers traced the edge of the empty plate. "I don't know where I'd fit, Kade. I've been someone else so many times, I'm not sure what's left." He set his own plate aside. "You're here now, that counts for something." Genevie looked at him then, not guarded like before. "Why aren't you married?" "Never found the right someone. Plenty of women in Montana. Surely one of them was close." "I don't look for close, I look for true." She was quiet, like she was turning that over in her mind. Then she pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked toward the window. "There was a man," she said finally. "A trader. He said he'd take me east to Helena. Promised a job, a room. Ended up locking me in a back room of his saloon in Livingston instead. Took what little I had. I ran when I saw my chance." Kade didn't speak. He didn't reach for her or soften his face into anything pitying. He just listened, same as he always had. "I don't want to be someone's burden again," she said, "but I don't know how to stand on my own 2 feet anymore." "You already are," he said. "You just don't see it yet." The wind picked up outside, brushing snow against the window panes. The fire crackled low, throwing amber light against the floorboards. "I stitched the tear in your coat," she said after a long pause. "The one at the shoulder." "Used some thread from my hem." He met her eyes. "I noticed you've got a fine hand." "I used to mend things, before." "What would you mend if you could pick anything?" She hesitated, then looked down. "Maybe myself." Kade didn't reach for her, but he leaned forward, elbows on his knees again, voice quiet. "You don't have to do that alone either." She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on his a little longer than before, and something settled in the space between them, something not loud or sudden, but steady, like the first roots pressing into thawed earth come spring. Later that day, Genevie took a pail from the porch and walked the short path to the well. Kade watched from the doorway, arms crossed, letting the cold bite his skin. She moved with care, but she didn't falter. Her breath clouded in the air, and her steps broke fresh prints into the snow. When she came back in, cheeks red, lashes dusted with frost, she handed him the full bucket with a small nod. He didn't need to say anything. She'd made it there and back. That was enough. That night, she sat at the little table, threading a needle by lantern light, patching the worn elbow of his shirt. He worked on shaping a broken horseshoe into a coat hook, glancing over at her now and then. The quiet between them wasn't empty, it held the weight of shared space, of something slowly growing. "You believe people can start over?" she asked, not looking up. "I believe some folks don't get another choice." Genevie set the needle down. "And you ever start over?" He nodded. "Once. When I stopped waiting for my brother to come back from the war, built a new life instead." She stood slowly, walked over, and laid the mended shirt beside him. Her fingers brushed his wrist just lightly. "I want to try," she said. His eyes met hers. You don't have to rush, I know. But I'd like to try here, Kade's voice was steady. Then you stay. She left her hand resting over his for just a moment longer before turning back to the cot, her steps sure and quiet. Kade watched her go, the weight in his chest shifting into something solid and warm. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and slow, and inside the cabin, something just as patient was taking hold. The thaw came slow, dragging its feet through March, leaving patches of churned mud and crusted snow scattered across the hills. Kade raked the sodden ground behind the barn, sleeves rolled past his elbows, the smell of damp earth thick in his nose. Somewhere behind him, Genevie's boots crossed the porch. You stopped for water yet? Her voice had a steadiness to it now, worn in like leather pulled through hard weather. He leaned on the handle, catching his breath. Not yet. She walked toward him, holding out a tin cup. Her fingers brushed his as he took it, and neither of them spoke until he drained it and handed it back. I found a seam of wild onions up the ridge, she said. Figured I'd bring some down later. You planning to cook them or just make me chew 'em raw like penance? Her mouth curved faintly, nothing showy. Thought I'd try a stew, I remember how. Kade nodded once, then looked out toward the far pasture. That pinto mare still favoring her back leg, she's improving. I rubbed her down this morning. Took her a while to warm to me, but she's not pulling away now. He glanced toward her, dirt still streaking his forearms, sun catching in his hair. Animals can tell. Whether your hands mean to hurt or not. Genevie didn't answer right away. She crouched to pick at a sprig of dried-up grass, turning it between her fingers. Been thinking about going into town, she said. Not to leave, just to see what's left of me there. Kade set the rake aside. You want company? I can manage. I know you can. That's not why I asked. She stood, brushing off her palms. You sure you're not worried I'll vanish? If you were going to, you already would have. She looked away down the slope that led toward the creek, where the ice had started to break apart in long, jagged slivers. I want to stop being afraid of places, she said. Of people. I want to walk into that dry goods store and not flinch when someone turns around too quick. You walk in, Kade said, and I'll be 2 steps behind you. Genevie didn't turn, but he saw her shoulders ease some. They rode in the next morning, frost still clinging to the edges of the fence rails, the mare moving steady beneath her. She sat straighter in the saddle than she had weeks ago, her coat mended, gloves snug at her wrists. Town was quiet, the streets thin with mud and melting snow. A boy tossed stones at a fence post, and a woman swept a porch with short, angry strokes. Nothing about it looked different, but Genevie's hands tightened on the reins. Kade didn't speak. He dismounted first, tied his gelding, and waited. She slid down slow, boots hitting slush. The store door creaked on its hinges as they stepped inside. The clerk looked up, nodded once. Morning, Prescott. Kade tipped his hat. Just picking up a few things. Genevie moved toward the shelves, fingers grazing over sacks of flour and jars of preserves. She chose a tin of coffee, a small bundle of dried apples, and a spool of thread. Her hands didn't shake. Will that be all? The clerk asked, looking at her now. Yes, she said, voice level. That'll do. Back outside, she exhaled slow, breath fogging in the air. You all right? Kade asked. I didn't look down once, she said. That's something. No, that's everything. They rode back under a sky the color of pewter, the wind carrying the scent of thawed bark and wet pine. When they reached the cabin, Genevie unpacked the supplies while Kade rubbed down the horses. Later, she stood at the stove, stirring the stew she'd promised. I used to think starting over meant forgetting, she said, not looking at him. And now I think it means remembering different, choosing what you carry. Kade leaned against the doorframe. You know what you're choosing, she turned, ladle still in hand. You, if you'll have me. He crossed the room in 2 strides, not rushed, just certain. His hand found hers rough and warm. I carried you out of that loft, he said, but I didn't carry you here. You walked. I know, she said, voice soft, but I don't want to walk away. You won't have to. The stew simmered behind them, the fire steady in the hearth. Outside, the snow had melted from the porch steps, and above the treetops, the first pale blue of spring sky began to show. April brought wind through the cottonwoods, the kind that rattled loose boards and carried the smell of wet stone down from the hills. Kade stood behind the cabin, hammer in hand, mending the chicken coop where a weasel had slipped through and killed 2 hens. He didn't curse the loss, just patched the gap with a square of wire and packed earth around the base. Genevie knelt nearby, sleeves rolled to her elbows, planting onions in the raised bed they'd cleared together. Her hands moved with quiet purpose, fingers pressing each bulb into the soil like she'd done it 100 times. She didn't speak until the last row was finished. "Did you ever think about leaving Montana?" she asked, brushing dirt from her palms. "Once," he said. "Right after my father passed. Thought I'd head south, maybe Arizona, but I stayed. Because of the land, because it was still mine, even without him in it." She stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from her back. "I used to dream of Oregon, not for any reason, I just wanted to see the ocean. Thought maybe it'd make me feel small in a good way." Kade leaned on the post, watching her. "You still want to go?" Genevie shook her head. "No, I think I wanted something wide enough to drown the past in. But I don't feel that way anymore." The wind tugged her hair loose from its braid, and she didn't bother tying it back. Instead, she walked to the fence and looked out at the far ridge where the grass was just starting to green above the thaw line. "I've been writing in the evenings," she said. Kade raised a brow. "Letters? No, not to anyone, just to myself. Things I want to remember, things I don't want to keep carrying." He wiped his hands on a rag, leaned his forearms on the fence beside her. "You going to keep them?" "I burn them when I'm done." He nodded once, not surprised. "That your way of setting things down? It's the only way that feels like letting go." They watched the ridge for a while, quiet again. A hawk circled above the tree line, riding the wind without effort. "I want to build something," she said. "Not just survive it, all of it. I want a life that holds." Kade didn't look away from the hills. "Then let's make one." Genevie turned toward him. "You mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." She stepped closer, voice barely above the breeze. "I've never had something I could count on, not once." "Not really. You do now." She didn't speak, just reached for his hand and held it between both of hers, rough palms and all. Her fingers were warm from the sun, from the soil, from living. That evening they sat outside on the porch, watching the light stretch long across the grass. Genevie had a thin stack of pages on her lap, the last of her writing before she meant to burn it. She glanced at him once before she stood and stepped into the yard. Kade followed without a word. She lit the small fire at the edge of the garden bed. One by one she fed the pages in, the flames catching fast. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. When the fire died, she turned into him. He wrapped his arms around her, firm and quiet, as she leaned her forehead against his chest. "I'm not who I was," she said. "I know. I don't want to be afraid anymore." "You won't be. Not with me." She looked up, eyes steady. "Then I'm yours, for the keeping." Kade didn't answer. He just bent and kissed her slow, sure, the way a promise is made when no words are enough. The stars came out one by one, and the wind settled to a hush. The coop was secure, the soil turned, the fire cold. And in the quiet night, 2 people who had never been given anything steady finally found something that would not break. The first calf came on a breathless morning in May, slick with dew and bird call. Genevie had been warming bread over the coals when Kade burst through the door, hair wild from the wind, boots tracked with damp clay. "She's gone off by the creek," he said, already reaching for the oilskin coat behind the door. "Not due for another week." Genevie didn't ask who she was already pulling on her boots. "I'll bring clean cloth and salve." They found the heifer half sunk in the soft earth, sides heaving, eyes wide with effort. Kade knelt by her head, voice low, hands steady on her neck. Genevie crouched beside the hindquarters, breath caught high in her throat. "It's breech," she said, voice tight. "We've got to turn it." Kade nodded once. "You guide me." She did, fingers cool and sure, guiding his hands as they worked together, wordless now except for the murmurs to the animal, the breath counts between strain and stillness. When the calf finally slipped free, weak but alive, Genevie wiped her hands on her apron and let out a laugh, more breath than sound, but bright all the same. Kade sat back in the mud, chest rising hard, and let his head fall back. "You were calm." "I wasn't. You looked it." Genevie glanced at the trembling calf, then at the mother nosing it with broad, wet strokes. "She'll take to him." "Like you took to this place," Kade said, not smiling, just watching her. "I didn't have much choice." "You did." She looked at him then, and something unspoken passed between them, not new but deeper now, anchored in sweat and effort and the steam rising from the warm earth. That night she washed her hands slow in the basin, scrubbing under her nails, the scent of livestock clinging to her skin. Kade stood behind her, quiet, until she turned. "I want to ask you something," he said. She leaned against the table, towel in hand. "All right. This isn't just shelter anymore, not for me. I wake up and think of you first. I work and wonder what you'll say about it. I come home and look for your boots by the door." His voice didn't falter, but it softened. "I want you to take my name." Genevie didn't move, but her eyes filled, slow and quiet. "I didn't think I'd ever be someone's wife," she said. "Thought I'd worn that chance thin." "You didn't," he said. She crossed to him, hands still damp, and laid them on either side of his face. "Then yes. Yes, I'll be yours." They married under the cottonwoods, just the preacher from town, the Weller boys as witnesses, and a ribbon in her hair that she'd saved from her mother's things. There was no lace, no music, just the wind and the smell of lilac and the steady way Kade looked at her like he would never look away again. They built a second coop that summer and a pen for pigs. Genevie planted squash and beans, and Kade carved her a bench for the porch, sanding it smooth by lantern light. They ate supper side by side, knees brushing beneath the table, hands meeting without meaning to. She wrote less, not because there was less to say, but because she didn't need to burn anything anymore. The past still lived in her, but it no longer weighed her down. It had shaped her, but it didn't define her. One night, as August settled in gold across the fields, she sat with her feet in the creek, skirt hiked to her knees, eyes closed to the sun. Kade waded in beside her, water up to his calves. "You always this still when you're happy?" he asked. She opened one eye. "I used to think happiness had to be loud. Laughter, music, dancing. And now I think it sounds like water and wind and your boots in the grass." They didn't speak again for a long time, just let the current tug at their ankles while the sky turned orange. When the first frost came, they stacked firewood shoulder high, and Genevie stitched a quilt with pieces of her old dress hems and Kade's worn work shirts. The cabin grew warmer not just from the stove, but from the life they'd made quiet, steady, real. One morning near the turn of the year, she pressed his hand to her belly. "You'll be a father come spring," she said. Kade didn't speak, just pulled her close and rested his forehead against hers, breath thick with wonder. When the baby came, a girl with eyes like the blue-gray before snow, Genevie held her to her chest and wept without fear. Kade stood at the foot of the bed, hands shaking, then kissed them, both his wife and his daughter, with a reverence he didn't know he had. They named her Aaliyah after no one, because she was the start of something new years past. The cabin grew, one room, then two. The porch held 3 chairs now, and a swing Kade hung from the rafters. Genevie taught Aaliyah her letters by firelight. Kade showed her how to saddle the gentlest mare. They watched storms roll in together and held each other when the winds rattled the shutters, never turning away. Nothing large or wild ever came to claim them again. Their days were marked by planting, by mending, by the quiet miracle of being chosen, every dawn and every dusk. And at night, when the fields were hushed and the child slept sound, Genevie would rest her head against Kade's chest and listen to the rhythm of a heart that had once been hers to trust and was now hers to keep.